Good morning, everybody. Este mensaje lo voy a repetir en español en unos segundos. My name is Andrea Saiko, and I am here with the Community Language Cooperative. I am here with Lulu today, who is my partner. And we are here because we would like to help you create a space for language justice. This means that everybody will be able to speak and hear in the language of their heart. And to do that, today we're going to offer simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish. In a couple of seconds, we're going to turn on the interpretation feature and you're going to be able to see a world map popping up in the bottom of your screen. If by any chance you are on a tablet or your phone, you're going to see 3 dots or where it says more. I ask that, that if you are not fully bilingual in both languages, you join one of those rooms. So if your main language is English, please select the English language. And if it is in Spanish, select the Spanish language. If you are going to be speaking in English, please remember to stretch your words because Spanish is 15 to 20% longer than English, and it takes a little bit longer to translate, interpret everything you're saying. And try to speak clear and not to use any slangs or like acronyms like CLC. Nobody will know in the other language what CLC is. And that's it. If you ever have any questions, you can put it in the chat and whoever is on chat in translation will be able to answer. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Andrea y yo estoy aquí con la Community Language Cooperative. Estoy aquí porque quiero ayudarnos a crear un espacio de justicia del lenguaje donde todos podamos hablar y escuchar en el idioma de nuestro corazón. Para hacer eso, hoy vamos a brindar interpretación simultánea en inglés y en español. Y en algunos segundos, cuando brindamos la interpretación, tú vas a ver en la parte de abajo un mapamundo donde vas a poder escoger el idioma de tu corazón. Si tu idioma es el español, escoge español. Y si es de inglés, escoge el inglés. Si tú eres totalmente bilingüe, no tienes que escoger ninguno de esos dos salones. Pero si tu idioma de tu corazón es español, escógelo. Si en algún momento tienes alguna pregunta, puedes hacerla en el chat y te podemos responder. Si estás en una tableta o en un teléfono, da clic donde están los 3 punticos donde dice More para que puedas escoger el idioma de tu corazón. Y recuerda que cuando estés hablando, tengas el micrófono bien cerca y que estires también tus palabras y que no lo hagas súper rápido porque nosotros en español hablamos muy rápido. Y eso es todo. Whenever you are ready, Emily, we can begin. Voy a empezar la interpretación. Escojan su idioma. I will begin interpretation. Please choose your language.
Okay, great. Gracias. Thank you for joining us today to listen to a presentation from Nakimia Agnew. Pardon me, I almost said your name wrong. Nakimia Agnew is a longtime friend and partner of NCFL. We first came to know and love her when she served as a parent facilitator at one of our Toyota Family Learning sites in Tupelo, Mississippi. Tracy Knowles, who's on this call, was her coach and has sung her praises ever since. In every kind of capacity we can use Nakimia or bring her forth and show how brightly she shines, we do so. So just a little bit of biographical information about Nakimia. She is a licensed certified social worker. She has her Master's of Social Work from the University of Southern Mississippi and her Bachelor's of Social Work from Delta State University. She is certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, structured analysis family evaluations home study, certified mindfulness informed clinician level 1, certified grief counseling specialist, and is a trained eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapist. Nakimia has further training in motivational interviewing, play therapy, applied suicide intervention skills training, and crisis behavior management. Nakimia is an approved licensed clinical social worker supervisor with the Mississippi State Board of Examiners for Social Workers and marriage and family therapist. She has worked with trauma and family issues for over 15 years, including teaching classes and leading groups in parent education, divorce education, grief and loss, anger management, resource parent training, and healthy relationships. Her specialties include trauma counseling, grief counseling, and mindfulness. She served as the domestic violence coordinator for the Family Resource Center in Mississippi for 13 years. Nakimia is now the director of social services for North Mississippi Primary Health Care and owner of the private practice Abundant Expressions Counseling Services. See what I said? That's an impressive bio. It's one of the most impressive bios I've ever read, actually. So we're so happy to have Nakimia here today. She is obviously an expert in her field, and we're so glad that she agreed to do this session for us. So Nakimia, I will turn it over to you, ma'am.
So, Emily, I am very happy to be here this morning. And like you made me sound so important. Um, but just to break down what I do and what I love is that I work with people and I love working with people. And that's it. Um, in a nutshell, all that other stuff is just glitter and fluff. The heart of me is that I love working with people. I love helping people. I love people, and that's it, and that's me. And so I'm very glad to be here this morning. I'm coming from South Pillow, Mississippi this morning, and the sun is shining. We had a lot of rain yesterday, so I'm very glad that the sun is shining. And as soon as we're off the call, and it's warm outside, we're at about 55 degrees. So I'm going to sit outside on the porch and soak in the sun when this is over. And so just this morning, they asked for me to talk to you all about domestic violence. As we go throughout the day or throughout this session this morning, I want you to feel free. I want it to be very interactive. Also, I want to make sure that you guys feel comfortable asking questions. We are going to allow questions throughout the session. So if you have a question, if you will raise your hand or raise your hand in the chat, and we'll try to make sure that we're able to answer that question. If you're like me and you wait to the end, you will have forgotten everything that you were going to ask. And I don't want you to forget, or I don't want to leave out anything. So feel free to ask questions. And I'm going to try to start my PowerPoint. The other thing is this morning I will be struggling because I know you guys see my hands everywhere. I'm a mover and I'm used to being up and walking around when I'm presenting and talking. So sitting in this chair is quite a struggle for me. But we're gonna do it and we're gonna figure out how to share the screen.
Thank you for helping me.
No
Sorry for all the technical issues this morning, guys.
That's okay, we'll move forward.
Okay.
So just because we had those technical difficulties or issues, for me and for you, and because you heard that I'm a therapist, and so I'm all about self-care and mental health, I'm going to let you all, and I am just going to take a breath right now. And so anything that issue presented for us or gave to us, just in that breath, we can just let it go and move forward with what we're supposed to do. So I'll take another breath. And we will begin. So the title of my presentation this morning is See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and Speak No Evil. And we will be talking about domestic violence or intimate partner violence. They are one and the same. And so there are just a couple of quotes in where we can move forward that I would like to share with you. In my case, it started as verbal abuse. I've known my partner for 20 years and he was a good person. He started changing. He became more combative. He shot me and said, "Look what you made me do, Angie. You made me shoot you." These are Angela's words. His behavior changed rapidly. I know I should have recognized it, but when you are inside of a situation, it's hard to get perspective of things. One day, my daughter called me crying, saying my ex threatened to hit her in the head with a hammer. I called the police and got a restraining order. The next month, I had it rescinded because I just knew that this man would never hurt me or my child. I heard a policeman say, "Oh, this is just another domestic violence case," as he was standing over my dead child's body just 5 feet away. Those are Elizabeth's words. I met my abuser when I was 14. At first, there wasn't physical abuse. It was emotional. He would embarrass me or make me feel inferior in front of other people. It went from verbal to physical real fast. He made me believe he was the only person who would ever love me. Those were Tiffany's words. The first time he put his hands on me was while I was pregnant. I wanted my daughter to have a father, so I stayed with him. The violence progressed. It was sexual, physical, and emotional. No one knew what went on behind closed doors. He treated me like I was his property. I got my first restraining order after he showed up at my apartment. He threw me around, he choked me, and I called 911. The police treated me like I was a delusional, hysterical, uncooperative person. And those are Kirby's words. So we'll take a break. So those are just some of the words, some of the quotes that we have had from victims or survivors of domestic violence. When we look at, there are so many words and there are so many things that these victims have to say. And so today I hope that what we will do is that we will look at what domestic violence is. We will look at intimate partner violence, and we'll discuss a couple of myths about domestic violence and make them truth or fact. We will look at different types of different forms of domestic violence, our intimate partner violence. We'll also talk about and look at the cycle or the wheel of power and control. We will discuss COVID-19, which is a word that we hear every single day. It's on the TV or the radio, log onto the computer, you see COVID-19. So we cannot let this pass without talking about COVID-19 and how it has affected or how domestic violence has been affected by it. We're also going to talk about some barriers that victims have to receiving services and look at some of the reasons why women stay in those situations. And we're also going to talk about, which I feel like is probably what you guys feel like we want to talk about most, is ways that we can help, what it is that we can do for victims of domestic violence. There's just a couple of things that I would like you to take into consideration as we're talking, is that one of the things I want you to know is that men or women can be victims of domestic violence. It's not only women, it can also be men. But you will hear me use the feminine for the victim and the masculine for the abuser, only because that's the way that I'm used to talking. And to flip back and forth can be very confusing, and because more often women are victims of domestic violence. The other thing that I want you to consider and to remember is that as we were talking, I think that we are in different states and in different areas. So this is going to be really general information. Different states have different laws and different resources available. Different areas have different resources and different laws for domestic violence. And so I encourage you that once we finish, that you use Google and find out what your state laws are as far as reporting and also looking for resources that are available in your community for victims. And just throughout, we will, because talking about domestic violence can be very heavy. And some of us might even be triggered if we have been a victim of domestic violence, or we know a victim of domestic violence, or if we have experienced any type of violence ourselves or through someone else. So I invite you that if you start to get anxious or if you start to feel yourself be triggered by any of the content or any of the information we're talking about, to take a breath. As a therapist, I tell people that water is our source. And so if you have something to drink beside you, you start feeling yourself stop breathing and you start feeling yourself getting a little heated or feeling different, then take a sip of water and just regroup and recuperate if you need to step away. And also, I want you to feel comfortable and feel free in doing that.
Nakimia?
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're having a little bit of muffle on your speaker and or your microphone. I'm wondering if there's something covering it or if maybe you could get a little bit closer.
Get closer? Okay.
Andrea, the interpreter was having a little trouble hearing you, so I just wanted to, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that was why I
No,
asked.
that's fine.
That's a little bit better. Thank you.
That's better. Okay, great. So question and answers, questions. Please ask questions. Hopefully I will have the answer. If I don't have the answer, I'll get back to you. I'll find it. Because I'm a sleuth for finding answers about domestic violence. So I'll find it and I'll get it back to you if I don't know it. So just to move forward and look at what is domestic violence. There we go. Yes. So domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery. Let's see, I can't even see that because I am covering. There we go. Sexual assault and or any other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. It includes physical violence, sexual violence, threats, economic and emotional, psychological abuse. So that's a mouthful. When we talk about domestic violence is, or intimate partner violence is any type of act from a partner towards another partner. It does not matter the race, it does not matter the gender, it does not matter the type of relationship. It is any type of violence, a pattern of violence within a relationship. And so many people ask if it happens one time, is it domestic violence? And that's an iffy question, not necessarily. It could have just been an incident of violence. When we talk about domestic violence, we're looking at a pattern of situations that happen. Often, when we think about domestic violence, we think about physical violence, and that's kind of where our knowledge stops. Usually, in domestic violence situations, the physical act is not the first act of domestic violence. It's usually the one that shakes you or jars you the most. It's the one that makes you question um, your relationship the most. So when we're talking about domestic violence, we're not only talking about physical abuse, we're talking about any type of threat, we're talking about any type of violence, we're talking about any type of abuse from one partner to another. And when we're looking at domestic violence is not new. It's something that has been going on for years. As a matter of fact, I want to ask you all if you are familiar with the saying rule of thumb. Y'all ever heard that or ever said that rule of thumb? And when we use that, we think of a rule of thumb is to, for me, not to be in control of technology because that is not my strong point. Okay. So rule of thumb really means that it's easily learned or easily applied, or this is what you will do in this situation. This is what you will do for this procedure. There are there's information or there's research out there that says rule of thumb actually started back years and years ago. It's an English saying or English term because back in those days it was legal and it was actually pretty common for husbands to beat their wives. And so the rule of thumb was when you beat your wife, you cannot use a object that is wider than your thumb. So that is the rule of thumb is that you can beat your wife, but the object that you use to beat her cannot be wider than your thumb. So when we say rule of thumb, that's what that means. And there's also some research out there that says, or there's some things out there that say that in South Carolina, there's a law that says that it's legal for a man to beat his wife using the rule of thumb. So only with an object that is no wider than his thumb. On Sundays. So it's legal to beat your wife on Sundays with an object no wider than your thumb. When I heard that, it was mind blowing to me. And there's some that say that that's true, and some that says that it's not true. It's an interesting fact, but it also just tells us how common domestic violence is. It is never okay. It is not okay for anyone to use any type of physical violence or any type of physical threat or intimidation to gain control over anyone. Interesting. Okay, we'll move forward, Emily. So I want to go over a couple of myths about domestic violence. So when we look at it and we talk about it, we know that is what it is. Domestic violence is violence within a domestic situation between partners. You do not have to be married. It does not have to be man and woman. It can be a woman-woman relationship, or male and male relationship, a male and a woman. It can happen in all forms of relationships. Domestic violence only affects certain kinds of people. That is a myth. When we look at statistics, we know that statistics tell us that one in every four women has been physically or sexually abused by her partner. That's astounding. That's a large number. It also tells us that domestic violence is primarily a crime against women. However, men can also be abused. So we want to make sure that we are inclusive of males in domestic violence situations, because they can be the batterer, but they can also be the victim in these situations. When we look at intimate partner violence, it affects people of all ages, even teenagers. In fact, statistics tell us that women between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rate of domestic violence. So we think of that, that's very young. They're at the highest rate for intimate partner violence, for domestic violence. Second myth is that domestic violence is just a push, a slap, or a punch, and it does not produce serious injuries. That is definitely not true. On average, more than 3 women are murdered by their husbands or boyfriends in this country every day, and that is a huge number. Domestic violence is a health is a healthcare risk. It's a problem in all of our communities and in society. The other thing that we're going to look at and talk about a little bit later, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it because I might forget, is that 37% of women who sought treatment in emergency rooms was for injuries that occurred in a domestic violence situation. And I am going to jump ahead because we'll talk about, when we look at COVID, COVID has closed down, or a lot of visits to the emergency room have decreased due to COVID because of fear of contracting the virus. And so women are not going into the emergency room and receiving help because they don't want to get COVID. And it's a question, COVID or domestic violence. Both are deadly, but most don't see domestic violence as deadly as COVID. The other thing is that a lot of women receive services because they go into the emergency room because of a injury that was caused during a domestic violence incident. They're not going in and receiving that. The other thing is that the staff in the emergency rooms or in the hospitals, they are flooded with COVID patients. And so they're not able to take the time to ask questions about the injury or to provide the same support to women who have injuries. So before, the nurse who noticed bruises in multiple stages on a woman who came in for a cut on her head is not asking questions about those other bruises. She's only focused on treating that cut on your head and then getting you out, so that you're getting you out of the emergency room to make that bed available for a COVID patient or to get you out of that room so that you're not at such high risk. So COVID has really taken away a lot of resources for women and opportunities for women to receive services and help during this for domestic violence. Anyway, um, physical and sexual dating violence against adolescent girls is associated with increased risk of substance use, unhealthy weight control behaviors, sexual risk behaviors, pregnancy, and suicidality. And so when we're looking at these young women, our girls who are in high school and junior high, they're also at risk for domestic violence, and they're also being victims of domestic violence, and they're missing out too on that medical treatment. So domestic violence is not just a hit, a push, a slap, or a punch. Um, it can be deadly, and a lot of women suffer from injuries that end up being fatal for them. Another myth is that battering is a momentary loss of temper. This is a huge myth, and one I'm going to talk about just for a little while. Domestic violence is defined as a pattern of assaultive and coercive behaviors, including physical, sexual, and psychological attacks, as well as economic coercion. When we think about bad tempers, we often label batterers or he's just angry, he's in a bad mood all the time. Um, Battering is not just a loss of temper. Battering is the issue of power and control. That's another reason why when we not only have I worked with victims of domestic violence, but also have worked with batterers of domestic violence. One of the things that we try not to do is that we don't typically refer batterers of domestic violence to anger management classes, because battering is not an issue of anger management. It's not just a loss of temper. It's an issue of power and control. And so, what you would do, issues management that you would teach for people who have issues with anger are very different from people who have power and control. So, when we think about batterers, often they are very, what's the word that I've used? Suave and very oh, I cannot think of the word. It is completely left my hand. But people like them, and they don't have problems at work with anger or issues with coworkers. They're well liked. Um, and they're batterers at home. So if it's an issue of anger management, you can't manage your anger at home. You can't manage your anger at work. Anger management goes with you wherever you go. When we talk about domestic violence, we talk about battering, it is towards your partner, and that is the difference. But we will use that, oh, he just lost his temper, oh, he's under a lot of stress, um, oh, he just got a little angry, he didn't know what to do. We can put him in anger management. He can go get some counseling for anger management and he'll be okay. You won't treat the issue with anger management, because battering is about power and control. If you can control yourself, if you can control your anger when you're at work, if you're in a high stress job, then you can control your anger when you're at home and you and your partner are in a stressful situation, if that makes sense. 65% of women physically assaulted by an intimate partner report having been assaulted multiple times by the same partner. Most of the time, we only know of one incident because there's the one incident that brought our attention to the violence. But for those who were in the actual domestic violence situation, it has been a pattern. It has been something that was ongoing. And usually the physical violence is not the first act of violence. So when we talk about domestic violence, sometimes, and there's different types of batterers. I like to call them the pit bull and the cobra. So if you see a pit bull, you automatically are afraid and scared. There's the angry. They have this um, stereotype of they're very angry and vicious creatures. If you see a pit bull, you automatically run. But a cobra is much more sleek. You don't see a cobra coming up, and the attack catches you off guard. So those are just two different types of batterers. So what was I talking about? Oh, the pattern of violence. So sometimes it starts with things like, you know what, I'm going to buy you all of your clothes because I know what looks good on you. I know what I like on you. You look really good in this outfit. This is what I want you to wear. That sounds really good for a person. Um, just think about on Valentine's Day, you come home and you've got all of these clothes and all of your clothes are gone. And these are the things that I want you to do, and these are the things that I want you to wear. That can be seen as something that is very romantic and loving. And I can just see, uh, I'll take myself saying, oh, he must really, really love me. He bought me all these things, all of these clothes. He really, really cares about me. That could be the beginning of a domestic violence situation. That in that way, he is able to control what you wear and what you look like in your physical. Bright colors or things that are more fitted, and what he buys for you is something that is more loose fitting, and it could be vice versa. But buying clothes can be a way of power and control over what you wear. I want you to look like what I want you to look like. Also, things like isolation. I want you to spend time with me. No, don't go out with your girlfriends, or don't be on the phone with your girlfriends. Just, I just want to be with you. I want us to spend time together. I want us to be together every minute, every moment. For someone who is just starting into a relationship, that can look really good, but that could also be the start of a domestic violence relationship. And again, remembering as we're talking that domestic violence is about power and control. So if I isolate you from your friends and I isolate you from your family, then that puts me in power and control over you. I can control you more. Um, I can have power over where you are and what you're doing. It looks good because I want you to be with me, and so that's romantic and that's beautiful. But it could also be the beginning of stages of domestic violence. And so when we look at those things and we talk about those things, they can sneak up on you. They can sneak up on a person. He's buying me clothes. He always wants to be with me. He's cut me off from his friends. He's molded me into what he wants me to look like. And now starts the physical violence. Now the physical violence has started. I don't have my friends anymore to talk to. I don't feel good about myself because he's changed how I look. And so that's kind of the pattern in which it grows. Often it does not just start with physical violence. That's just the incident that we see first. And that's another thing for us to remember when we're talking about domestic violence or ever working with someone who's a victim of domestic violence. It's often just an incident that we hear about or that we know about, but for them, it's a process. It's something that has been ongoing, which makes it easy for us to say, you should just leave or why didn't you see it? But for them, when things happen in a pattern or when you are in the situation, it's a lot harder to see. And it's a lot easier to say, just leave that situation. You just leave him. You can just go to a shelter because you get to go back home and you get to be in your bed. But for them, it changes their whole life and changes their whole situation. Okay, another myth. It is easy for domestic violence and I just kind of talked about this. It is easy for victims of domestic violence to leave their abusers. It's not easy for victims of domestic violence to leave their abusers. It's easy for other people to tell them to leave, but it is definitely not easy for them to leave. Actually, women are at a higher risk of being killed or being injured when they leave their abusive situation. And that's something for us to think about as we work with or when we talk to victims of domestic violence is to say to leave should not be your first thing, should not be the first thing that you say. Sometimes they are safer there than they are when they leave the situation. If you just think about Lifetime movies or you think about any type of movie, it's usually after the victim has left when she is killed by her abuser or when the battering gets worse. She's in more danger when she leaves. Because if she is there in the home with him, he has that power and control. And remember, in domestic violence is about power and control. So as long as she's in the household with him and hasn't left the situation, he's able to maintain that power and control. When she leaves, he's lost that power and control, and that's what sends him or sends the batterer into a rage and causes death. So those are just a few myths that people believe about domestic violence, and some of the reasons why women end up staying in domestic violence situation because we believe things that are not true, like that it is easy to leave, or that it was just one hit or one punch or one slap, or that it's not a really serious medical issue. Okay, Emily, we can move forward. So just some statistics, and we kind of already talked about and hit on those. I'm not really going to go into a whole lot about it. One of the things I really want us to focus on and look at is that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience some type of domestic violence during their lifetime. That's a lot. Even if you look on the screen and you count us, if you say 1, 2, 3, 4, for every person, every fourth person that you count on the screen, that means that there has been some type of domestic violence, which is a huge number. And the other thing that really stands out is that women between the ages of 18 and 24 are most commonly abused by an intimate partner, which is a really huge thing and something for us definitely to look at and to remember. We'll move forward. So when we talk about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, there are several different types. And I've kind of hit on and talked about those, but there's physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse, and there is financial abuse. And that's just a few of the forms or a few of the types of domestic violence. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at the circle of or the wheel of violence. So we'll move to the next slide. There we go. So when we look at here, we have the wheel of violence is what we call it. And this is the Duluth model. So when we talk about domestic violence, Duluth is the head researcher on domestic violence and information. And this is the Duluth model of the wheel of power and control. So again, as I said earlier, when we look at domestic violence, it's about power and control. It's not an issue of anger management. It's not a loss of temper. It's not a drunk or high issue. It's all about power and control. Batterers use these different tactics to try to gain power and control over their victims. Okay, and so we look at physical violence, sexual violence, financial, economic, all of the things, all of the different types that we talked about earlier. And I just want to kind of go through this wheel and look at and talk about the different kinds of violence. And some of the things that you will hear me reference to is that in society, we have kind of normalized domestic violence. We have normalized it in our music. Music lyrics talk about males being aggressive to women, and we kind of celebrate it as it's a good thing or it's the way that we're supposed to be. When we look at TV or we look at social media, celebrating or kind of making domestic violence into something that is a good thing. And we need to use these platforms as a way to normalize domestic violence so that victims feel comfortable coming out versus feeling like it's a normal thing and that's the way that things are supposed to be. For example, one of the movies that so many of my teenagers loved back when they was popular was Twilight. And so if anybody is familiar with the Twilight series, everybody wanted the Edward Bella love because Edward and Bella there was this love story and they were so in love with each other. If you really look at that situation, there was some incidents of domestic violence between Edward and Bella because he wanted power and control over her. He wanted to control who her friends were. He wanted to control who she spent time with. So things like that can be confusing for our young girls and our young people, and thinking that is being romantic and that's a good thing. But it could be mm, some domestic violence there. There are definitely some traits there. So back to the wheel. So when we look at the wheel, we'll start at using intimidation as a way of gaining power and control. So when in using intimidation, this is making the victim feel afraid by using looks, gestures, actions, smashing things, destroying the victim's property, using the pets as a way to gain control or being abusive of the pets, displaying weapons. And so when I talk about this, I like to talk about I'm in the South here in Mississippi, and we all have that look that our mama gives us in church when we are being too loud or not paying attention. You know the look. And when she gives you the look, you know that you're supposed to sit still and pay attention to what's going on. It's Patty, you and Huntsville, you shaking your head, so you know that southern mama look, be still. That's the same look that batterers use to gain intimidation over their victims. Or it could be in gesture like maybe he carries a gun and you might see him pat his pocket or put his hand on his pocket. That lets the victim know, hey, it's time for you to straighten up, or you're getting out of line. And so those gestures are ways to control them, or smashing their property, destroying their property. This is what's going to happen to you if you don't do what I tell you to do. And again, remember, right in the middle of all this is power and control. So they use intimidation as a way to gain power and control over their victims. The other thing is, so we move on around the wheel using emotional abuse. So this would be putting the victim down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, making them think that they're crazy or that they play mind games with them, humiliating them, or making the victim feel guilty. And this is a way to tear down victims, which also ends up isolating victims. So you might have a girl who is very confident about herself, and her batterer makes comments about her weight or makes comments about her the way she looks. You wear too much makeup, or you don't look good in this color. Using ways to intimidate them emotionally and to make them feel bad about themselves. How does that gain power and control over someone? It makes them feel like we heard in one of the victim statements earlier. She said, he made me feel like he was the only person who would love me. I didn't feel lovable. And so sometimes there's an old song that says, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. If you feel like that's the only person that will ever love you or be with you, you're more likely to stay in the situation, and you're more likely to excuse the behavior of the batterer. And that's just another way to gain power and control over a victim. Also, in that emotional abuse, if she doesn't feel good about herself, often when we lose our confidence, we lose our voice, and we don't feel like we can use our voice to ask for help or to know that it's okay for help. It's okay for us to need help. We move on around the wheel, and next is using isolation, which is a huge thing. And again, I'll jump back to COVID because COVID is the perfect storm for domestic violence. The government is telling us that we need to use social distancing and isolation to keep ourselves safe from COVID-19. Well, when we look at domestic violence, that's a tool of a batterer is to isolate his victim. To isolate victims means that I'm taking away your support system. It means that I'm taking away your confidence. So this is controlling what the victim does, also who they talk to or who they see, what they read, where they go, limiting their interaction with others. Again, COVID-19, perfect storm for domestic violence because these are all the things now that we are practicing on purpose to keep ourselves safe. And so it's also when we look at domestic violence, one of the tools that they use to gain power and control over their victims. So now the thing is that batterers have some type of justification for isolation, which is the sign that we would look for is a person isolating or pulling back from friends. Now it's normal for somebody not to see my friend because she's quarantined. And so I don't know what's going on with her, but I'm not alarmed because everybody is quarantined now. Does that make sense? We move on around the wheel and we look at minimizing, denying, and blaming, which is a big thing. The abuser will often make light of the abuse and not taking the victim's concerns as serious as they might be. Uh, they might say things like, I didn't hit you that hard, or you're making it up. It's not as bad as you're making it out to be, um, or even saying that didn't happen. I never hit you, or I never did anything to hurt you. All I ever did was try to love you and to try to buy you things and to try to give you things and to try to give you a nice place. Or even shifting the responsibility of the abuse on the victim. And we heard that earlier in the victim statement too. She said, "You made me shoot you." That's what he told her. You made me shoot you. That's not something you can't make anybody shoot you, but that's a way to gain power and control, a mind game to get into your head. Maybe it was me, maybe it was my fault. And if I feel like it's my fault, if I feel like there's something that I did wrong, I'm probably not going to ask for help. I'm probably not going to try to um, I'm probably not going to call the police for assistance because it's my fault and it's going to they're going to blame it on me. Next is we move on around using the children as a way to gain power and control. And this is a huge thing. So this is making the victim feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass the victim if they have separated, threatening to take the children away. And so here we are again with you're not a good parent, you're a bad mom, or turning the children away from the parent, making them feel like they're a bad parent, or isolating the children from the parent. And so, as moms, most of us would do anything that we have to do to make sure that we can be with our kids and we can keep our children safe. The other thing that victims use often, I mean, that batterers use often, is to use our children against us is that I'll take him away from you. I'll take your child away from you, and nobody is gonna believe you. They're gonna believe me. And so victims will often stay in a situation so they can keep their families together. And so the other thing is that some victims stay in situations because a whole family is better than a broken family, is what they might believe. And so, again, batterers are not all these bad and horrible people that we think they are. Some of them are really good fathers. They're just not good partners. And so a victim might say that he's a really good dad. He provides. He's bringing home the money. He's keeping a roof over our head. He's really good with the kids. It's just that when we get behind closed doors, it's me. And so that might be a reason that a victim stays, and also a way for a batterer to gain power and control over the victim. If I leave you, how are you going to put a roof over our child's head? How are you going to take care of them? Using male privilege, which is a really big thing. This is treating the victim like they're a servant, making all the big decisions, not allowing them to be a part of any decision making about anything, acting like that they are the master of the castle. When I read this and think about the rule of thumb, is what comes up to me, because I can just see uh, anyway, I can just see it happen in the rule of thumb back in the day, and these men walking around with their thumbs. And this is a way. Also, I'm going to keep you under my thumb is another way of power and control. But being the one to define that there's a male role and there's a woman's role, which is what the rule of thumb did. Men had power over women. That's how things started. And it's also a cultural thing. In some cultures, that is what's acceptable, is that the male is the dominant over the female. And so when we look at and we talk about different cultures, also in the South, and I'm in the Bible Belt, and so one of the things is that the man is the head of the household, and that's okay. The male can be the head of the household, and the male can be the dominant. That does not mean that it's okay to um, use threats or violence towards me. So it's very different. Being the dominant, being the head of the household does not mean having power and control over me. Two very different things. And using economic abuse, like preventing them from getting a job. If you don't have a job and you don't have money, you don't have resources, you don't have a way to leave, you don't have a way to get out. So I have power and control over you, or giving you an allowance that you're only allowed this amount of money and you have to make it work. Again, another way of gaining power and control, or not letting them know or have access to money. So again, it's all about power and control. And using threats. Okay, so when we're talking about using threats, this means like um, carrying a gun, or telling them, this is another big thing that keeps women in domestic violence situations often, is if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. Threatening to hurt the kids. If you leave me, I'm going to kill the kids. And we saw that in one of the victim statements earlier also. So when we look at domestic violence is all about, and I feel like I keep saying this because it's so important and it's what it is, it's all about power and control. There are no excuses for domestic violence. Um, Men don't batter because they are drunk or because they are under the influence of some type of substance. That's not a reason for domestic violence. Men don't batter, or batterers don't batter victims because they're under high levels of stress. We've all been under high levels of stress before and not used violence as a way to gain power and control. Men don't batter because of anything that the victim has done. So there's nothing that anyone can do to make someone batter them. So it is never the victim's fault when they are in a domestic violence situation. Okay, Emily, we can move forward. So let me just stop right there. We can move, and we'll just kind of take a breath, because I feel like we did a whole lot in there. And I want to just stop and check and see, does anybody have any questions about anything we just talked about? Awesome. So we'll move forward. I don't see any. Yes, good. So we'll move forward and we look at the perfect storm, which is COVID-19, which a year ago nobody heard of, but now it's on every station. and part of just about every decision that we make on a daily basis. So when COVID-19 started, one of the ways for us to protect ourselves is through isolation, and there were all these stay-at-home orders. And so victims of domestic violence are in situations or in their homes more often now, which increases the number of or the incidence of domestic violence. Also, we know with COVID-19, it caused a lot of high levels of stress. We're stressed because of financial situations. There are a lot of people who have lost their jobs, lost income because of COVID-19, increased stress because you are home now. So a lot of people lost their coping skills. Maybe your coping skill was to go to the mall and go shopping. Well, now you can't go to the mall and you can't go shopping. Or your coping skill was to go out to dinner with friends. Well, now you can't go out to dinner with friends because we have to practice social distancing to stay safe. So it's a perfect opportunity for domestic violence. Again, is not the cause of domestic violence. None of this causes domestic violence. Domestic violence is a choice of the batterer, and that's something that we have to always remember. But these are things that might influence battering. The other thing that COVID-19 did is that it took away a lot of resources for people. So before there were domestic violence shelters in the community, well, there are some domestic violence shelters that are not taking in victims due to the high risk of COVID-19. We know that if one person in a shelter tests positive for COVID-19, we have to shut down the whole shelter and everybody in there. For precautions to remain safe. And so when the shelter is shut down, the victim has nowhere to go. And you might say, well, it's only shut down for, we isolate for 14 days. It's only shut down for 14 days. The victim can go after those 14 days are over. With domestic violence, when you get that moment to leave, that might be the only moment that you get to leave. So it is important for us to have some type of resource for our victims to go to at the moment they decide to leave, because it might not come. Studies tell us that it takes a victim 7 times to leave before they leave the situation and stay gone. After 7 times, they stop coming back. Um, and so that one time might be the only time. Also, we know that when a victim is trying to leave a situation, she is at a higher risk uh, for um, for death, to be murdered or to be seriously injured. And so it might be that one time when their shelter is closed that they're able to leave. So COVID-19 has taken away a lot of our resources, a lot of funding, a lot of our shelters, and a lot of resources for domestic violence is from through donation from others. Well, everybody now is struggling due to financial situations, due to loss of jobs, due to issues that COVID-19 have created, and so there's not as much funding available for resources for domestic violence. So I say to you, there's not a lot of information out there now because COVID-19 is so new. And so there's not a lot of statistics or a lot of data on COVID-19 and domestic violence. But we do know just from common sense, really, and looking at the situation for domestic violence, we know that there's going to be an increase. There are a lot of things that, a lot of numbers that we won't be able to catch, that we'll never know about because it won't be reported because of COVID-19. But we know that being at home more often increases risk for domestic violence. We know that increased stress increases risk for domestic violence. And we know that the decrease in resources also increases the risk for domestic violence. Um, and so the other thing, going back and looking at power and control, and this is something else for us to think about, is that when COVID-19 hit, we lost control. Everybody really lost control. We didn't have any control over where we were going or what we were doing. As a matter of fact, as therapists, one of the things that we looked at is, I don't know if you guys remember when it first hit, you could not find tissue paper on the shelves. And there was this whole tissue thing. Everybody was buying up tissue and paper towels, and there was none left. That was about control. We lost control because we didn't know what this thing was, how it was going to affect us, how long it was going to last. And so I can't control whether I get this or not, but I can control having tissue in my house. So that was a way for a lot of people to gain control. It was a trauma response, is what it was. People courting this tissue. It was something we can control. When you think about domestic violence, it's about power and control. And so batterers have lost control or have the feeling that they have lost control because of COVID-19, of where they can go, of what they can do. And again, that is another factor that influences or increases the risk for domestic violence. Okay, we'll move on and we'll take a breath and we'll keep going. So, some things for us to look for. What do we look for in others for signs of domestic violence? There are physical signs that we can look for, there are emotional signs that we can look for, and there are also changes in behavioral signs or things that we can look for. One of the things that we look for in victims of domestic violence is if you have someone who is very accident prone, or they always have bruises that they can't explain, or their explanation for the bruises don't match the story. So maybe you have somebody that comes in with a black eye and you ask them what happened, and they say, the baby hit me. Well, it's not likely that the baby hit you in the eye. It could happen, but not likely. So, misexplained or unexplained bruises, marks on a person could be a sign of domestic violence. Or them coming in with constant bruises and marks could be a sign of domestic violence. Things to look for is to look around the arms. Often we will see bruises on victims because batterers have a tendency to grab their arms, and also around the neck because choking is a big issue with battering and domestic violence. Um, Watching for wearing clothes out of season. So I have a sweater on um, because it's winter time. It's January. But if I had this sweater on in the middle of August in Mississippi when it's 1,000,000 degrees outside, that could be a red flag. Okay. That could be me trying to cover up some bruises that you can't see. So we'll look for changes in clothes or look for inappropriate clothes. Or if you have someone who normally is a dresser and they dress really nice, and you start seeing a change in how they dress, a change in their clothing. Maybe someone who wore more fitted outfits or um, form-fitting things are now wearing looser clothes, things like that. Those are things also to watch for. Um, Watching for not wanting to, someone who has an injury and not wanting to seek medical attention. So you might have someone that you see who has a bruise and it looks bad, and you feel like they need to go to the doctor and they don't want to go. And that's because oftentimes domestic violence is revealed in medical situations in the doctor's office because they're going to ask questions about how did you get this, and they're not able to explain it. And also, when you go into a medical office, they might do a full medical exam and reveal other bruises that you have been able to hide. So that's another sign to look for. Signs of depression. And so victims of domestic violence will often become very depressed because of their situation, because they now have someone who is in control over them. And so you might have someone who was very bubbly and happy, had a really good attitude, who is now more reserved, more isolated, or who seems more depressed. Things for us to look for. Change in their attitude or demeanor. So not only that depression or that being withdrawn, but also you might see a victim become more aggressive. And so The thing behind that is if you can't have control at home or you can't have power at home, you might try to have it in another setting or another situation. And so it might be a person who before had a very calm demeanor, who is now lashing out, who is more aggressive in their behavior. Also looking at change in attitude around the partner. And so I know now everything is on Zoom. And so, you might be paying attention to how someone is interacting with you over Zoom, over the video. And then when their partner comes in, you can see their demeanor change. You can see maybe they're not laughing and talking about the things that you were laughing and talking about before. Or maybe they sit up and try to be a certain way in front of that person. Or if their partner comes in, they get off of the line again, that isolation. They're not able to talk anymore. Um, Also listening to people in their language when they talk about their partner. He doesn't ever want me to go anywhere, or he really doesn't like for me to do this, or he really doesn't like for me to be around my family. So everyone has preference, and we have things that we like and that we dislike for our partners to do. But when you are hearing it as it's different in saying, oh, he really doesn't like for me to have curly hair. He likes my hair straight versus, oh, I can't have curly hair because he doesn't like it. And something might happen if my hair is curly. So looking for, those are some things to look for. So those are physical signs to look for, those bruises that are in different stages of healing, um, changes in clothes, trying to cover up or cover bruises, emotional signs, someone being really depressed, withdrawn, and changes in behavior. Someone who maybe was very happy and very energetic and outgoing, who is now more reserved and more withdrawn and not talking so much or not interacting so much with others. Okay. So there are a lot of barriers to victims leaving domestic violence situation. One of the barriers is lack of knowledge. People don't know that there's a way out. Most victims who have been in domestic violence, this is their first rodeo. They haven't been in a domestic violence situation before. And most people just don't have a whole lot of knowledge about it and resources. And so a lack of knowledge is a barrier to getting services or a barrier to getting out of a domestic violence situation. Lack of knowledge of being in a domestic violence situation. Some people don't realize that they're in a domestic abuse situation um, until somebody else shows it to them and points it out to them. Especially if they have been in that for a long time, or we talked about the different stages that it goes in. If you are in a situation, your perspective is different of it. And so there might be things that others see that you don't see. So people might not really realize that they are in an abusive situation and an abusive relationship. Cultural beliefs is another thing that we kind of already talked about. In some cultures, there is a dominant partner. And so we might confuse dominance or being the head of the household or being the lead in the family with power and control. And again, I go back and say domestic violence is about power and control. It's not about being the dominant or being the head of the household. It's about being able to control you, being able to control your behavior, being able to control what you do, what you say, where you go, and those things. Other barriers are lack of resources. There are not a lot of resources out there for victims of domestic violence. There are not a lot of places to go because resources cost money, and there's not a lot of money and a lot of funding for resources for domestic violence, or resources that are available for victims of domestic violence. So you might have a victim who the closest shelter might be 100 miles away and they don't have access to that resource or to that shelter. Or maybe they don't need a shelter. Maybe they just need a support group. And again, there's not one that's available in the area. They're spread out throughout our different states and counties, and they're not always accessible to the victims. Lack of resources um, to the victim it costs a lot to start over again. If you are in a household where there's two incomes, to start all over again is much easier said than done. So to think about, maybe the victim has never worked before because one of the ways to gain power and control was to not allow them to work. So for you to start all over again, those financial resources to be able to support yourself, and if there's a child, to support that child, might not be available for you. And lack of support is another barrier, and it's a huge barrier for victims. So that's lack of support from friends and families. I told you that 7 times, it takes 7 times for a victim to leave before they stay out of the relationship. After about the third or fourth time, the family is tired of you going back, and they're tired of you talking about how much you love them. And so they might not be as supportive of you when you are actually ready to leave. Lack of support because in some situations they might be encouraging you to stay with that person because they don't see the side of the batterer. They see the more suave and debonair person. So he's a really good person. He's a really good dad. He's a really good husband. They don't see what happens behind closed doors. Lack of financial support, lack of emotional support from others. And another thing is isolation is a huge strategy that batterers use. And so if they have isolated the victims from their friends and their family, then they don't have that support system that they need in order for them to leave the situation. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So here we go. Suggestions for helping. How do we help? What is it that we do? Your approach is going to be very important. When you approach a victim, your first thing to say should not be, you need to leave, or why do you stay, or say something blaming. Your approach should be very supportive of them. Sometimes just listening is a good approach to have when you're talking to a victim. It might be a process for them to leave, and it might go in stages. So we want to make sure that when we're approaching victims that we're being very non-judgmental and non-blaming of them, and that we are listening to them and really validating them and how they feel in that situation. So a victim might say, I love him. And the first thing that you want to say is, why would you love somebody who was hurting you or harming you? Well, we usually stay in situations or in relationships with people that we have feelings for and that we care for. And every moment is not a bad moment in a domestic violence situation. And so just validating them and saying, I can understand that. I understand that you love him. And just allowing them to be able to talk about it is a is the right approach to have when we're talking to victims. And also talking to them about or encouraging them in whatever decision it is that they make, whether it's the decision to stay or the decision to leave. We want to be supportive of them and encourage them to remain safe in whatever situation. Acknowledge that it's scary and it's difficult to talk about domestic violence. It's not something that you want to share with others. For a victim, domestic violence can be very embarrassing. It's embarrassing to talk to, even to your best friend about. And so we want to, again, make sure that's why our approach is soft and our approach is supportive and our approach is gentle. And also acknowledge that um, we need to tell this person in an approach that they don't deserve the things, they don't deserve to be a victim, and that they deserve better things. And again, offering those encouraging words. We want to be supportive of victims when they leave or if they decide to stay in the situation, offering that ear, someone for them to talk to, offering them, if at all, any financial support, offering them resources that are available, letting them know that there are shelters, that there are hotlines, that there are websites, there are different things that they can go um, to gain support, any type of support groups you might have available. You want to offer them that information. And having a plan. It's so easy to say leave the situation, but we really need to have some type of plan in place if we're even going to talk to a victim about what's going on. Because if you go to someone and you ask them if they're in a domestic violence situation and they tell you yes, you don't want to end it right there. You want to have some type of plan in place if they want to leave, if they want to go, um, and what they want to happen. Okay, and we're going to talk about a safety plan in just a little bit. Something for us to remember is that everybody heals different. Everybody's approaches are different. And everybody is not going to want to leave the situation. Some are going to want to stay in the situation. And we have to acknowledge that, we have to appreciate that, and we have to still be there to provide support for our victims. So when we look at and talk about trauma-informed care, and I'm gonna move a little fast because it's 11:30. So we started a little late, Emily. So am I still moving, or do I need to stop at 11:30?
You're fine, Nakimia. It's my fault for getting started late with the logistical problems that we had. But if anybody needs to leave, we certainly understand. And
Okay,
like I said, we are recording, so we can send the link later.
good. Just want to make sure, want to respect everybody's time. So when we look at trauma informed care is just recognizing that the people that are in our classes, or the people that we're working with, have some type of trauma. And so I'm going to move through this a little quickly because I do respect your time and want to be timely. There are 5 different principles to trauma informed care. And so when you're looking at your sites, or you're looking at your classes and how you're interacting, these are some things that you want to keep in mind. And that's an awareness that trauma awareness of the effects of trauma on survivors and on victims. There's some people in your classroom who might be triggered by domestic violence, or might be triggered by you having some type of power and control over your class. And so you giving them direction might trigger them, because that might be one of the tactics that the batterer used. Also, safety for survivors on a physical and on an emotional basis is very important. We want to make sure that we're having environments that are very non-judgmental, that we are careful about the words that we use and what we say when we're talking about domestic violence, or even in approaching any situation. We want to create an atmosphere where victims feel comfortable talking to us about their situation and about what's going on, which leads us into trustworthiness. And it's a process. And trustworthiness is about building relationships. And so it makes me think about, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Philadelphia, the movie with Tom Hanks, who had AIDS. He talked about when he was in the locker room with his bosses, they told a joke about a gay man. And then he knew that it was not okay for him to um, come out and to talk to them about him being gay. The same thing for victims. If we are making light of or minimizing situations, or if we are making jokes about the subject, then we're not creating that atmosphere where victims feel comfortable talking to us about what's going on and what's happening. Empowerment is important in making and decision making process. So when we talk about victims leaving, it is so, we want to say leave because we want them to be safe, and we want them to be in a situation where they're okay. But we also want to make sure that we are empowering victims. Domestic violence is about power and control. If you tell a victim, hey, you need to leave the situation, you in essence are doing the same thing that the batterer did. You're making a decision for them and telling them what to do. So instead, empowering them and encouraging them is a much more effective way of helping a victim and supporting a victim, even when they're getting ready to leave the situation. And inclusiveness for all, and knowing that domestic violence has no color, it has no age, it does not care how many limbs you have or how active those limbs are. So domestic violence, it does not discriminate in any form. And we have to be inclusive and know and say that just because they are of this race, then they're not in a domestic violence situation. Or just because they're in this age group, then they're not in a domestic violence situation. Uh, I have worked with teenagers in high school to couples who were in their late adulthood in domestic violence. So it comes in all ages, all shapes, and all forms. We move forward. So in safety planning is important. You want to make a safety plan for victims who decide to stay and for victims who decide to leave. And I encourage you that if you are not well versed or don't know a whole lot about domestic violence, to connect the victim with a resource who can help them with safety planning. But there are some things that maybe you can do in your agencies to help with safety planning, like one of the things that you can do is offer to keep important documents or paperwork maybe in client files, and the clients can have access to that. So things that they will need are copies of their birth certificates, or copies of their social security card, or copies of their driver's license, any important documentation that you might need to access a resource. We might be able to keep those things and make it accessible for our clients that we're working with. Uh, Also, there might be an opportunity for you to create some type of fund for victims of domestic violence to leave, something to help with a meal, or something to help with a hotel room, or something to help with a cell phone, some type of resource for them. Another part of safety planning is having phone numbers available. So because we all have cell phones, we're not likely to remember. I don't even know my mama's cell phone number, because when I call her, I just pick up the phone and I type in mama. I don't know what number comes up. I just know her name. And so keeping a list of numbers might be something that you can do as a part of a safety plan for the people that are in your programs. So emergency contacts, um, contacts for support systems, maybe a sister or brother or cousin or someone else. Those are things that we can do to help in safety planning. And we talk about important documents. So you can go online and you can encourage people in your class, if you have someone that you think might be a victim of domestic violence, to go online and create a safety plan. Technology is this great thing now, and there are a lot of online safety plans for victims of domestic violence that have different codes and stuff that you can't get into, or are ghosts. And so and there are also a lot of websites where victims can go and get domestic violence. And there's a button that you click. So if your batterer walks in, when you click the button, then it takes or it hides the screen. So those are some great things that technology has created for us, for victims of domestic violence, to help them to get information in a safe atmosphere. When we talk about safety planning, also talk about things like, where would you go? What would you do? Who would you talk to? What resources are available for you? And so safety plans could be 5 sentences long, or could be 5 pages long. There's so many things out there. First and foremost, in any situation, you always want to ask the victim first, are you safe right now? In safety planning, that's your number one most important question, is, are you safe right now? Because having your driver's license or phone number is not important if you're not safe at this moment. Any questions about safety planning? And so we will move forward and look at domestic violence is heavy and it's something big that we talk about, and it can be it's a very sensitive subject. And so again, I offer for you to take a breath at this moment because I feel like I've thrown a lot of information at you about domestic violence. And taking care of yourself is very important. And taking care of your own mental and emotional health when working with a victim of domestic violence is very important. Um, Again, 7 times after a couple of times, you yourself, as being a support system, might start to um, suffer from some vicarious trauma or experience some vicarious trauma, or you yourself might start to feel down from being the support to someone else. And so there's some things that you can do for yourself, like to take a breath that will help you. There's some things you can do, like empower yourself, that are very important for you as people who are working with victims of domestic violence. Being able to validate and connect, um, knowing that you can only do what you can do, and that is all that you can do, and being okay with knowing those things is very important. And appreciate yourself and appreciate what it is that you do. We work with some wonderful and great people, and oftentimes we thank them for what it is that they do and we appreciate others for what they do, but we forget to appreciate ourselves and we forget to thank ourselves. And so that's very important for you and taking care of yourself and taking care of you. And remember that you can't make decisions for others, but you can be sure that they have your support. And when you support someone, you want to support them with a healthy you. And in supporting them, make sure that you are supporting yourself. We'll move to the next slide. So I want to stop here and open up for questions.
Nakimia, this is Tracy. I don't have a question, but I just have a comment. One of the things that I remember that happened actually when I was on a visit to your former program in Tupelo, there was a mother who had left the program 2 years prior, and she stopped in on this particular day because she remembered, she remembered the advice of the parent facilitator that they were always there and open for her if she needed to talk. And this particular young mother was involved in a domestic violence situation. But what I remember about that, and it just jogged my memory when you said what you just said, the parent facilitator was frustrated at the time because she felt like she couldn't reach that parent. But you never know what someone is listening to. And then, it took 2 years, but then that person was ready to hear that message. So I guess it was just so wonderful that the staff person was able to do that. And although that person was frustrated at the time that they couldn't reach this mother, that message stayed with that mother for several years until that mother was ready to receive that help.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's the thing, Tracy, is that you know when you are ready, um, and no one else can make that decision for you. And until you're ready, there's really nothing that I will say or that I will do at that moment to make you ready, if that makes sense. And so, what we can do is to remember to practice that trauma informed care, to remember to practice that active listening, to remember to stay encouraging, and to just validate people where they are. And that is so important. I have never said to a victim, you need to leave. I can't make that decision for anyone. And I can't say ever that you're ready to leave. I can only say that these are the things that we can offer for you when you leave, that I can offer you support, that I can offer you someone to listen to, that I can offer these resources to you. And when they are ready, just like you're talking about that, mom, that's the time. That's the right time.
Yo quería decir un par de cosas. Primero que los niños también son un importante signo de alerta. Así como hay cambios conductuales en las madres, en las esposas, los niños también y los que trabajan, los profesores, la gente que trabaja directamente con los niños, puede ver los mismos cambios de actitud, de comportamiento, de hábito, y eso es una herramienta importante también para el mundo de la educación. Ese era un comentario. Y lo segundo, por lo menos en el mundo latino, yo soy chilena y soy trabajadora social y trabajé también con temas de adicciones y de violencia doméstica. Más o menos se demora 7 años una mujer en revelar el tema, independiente de la edad que tenga. O sea, por lo tanto podemos ver que en el noviazgo también hay signos de abuso. Entonces, qué importante es entregar herramientas a las adolescentes, a las mujeres jóvenes, que visualicen que no es que me quiere más porque me ve el celular, no es que me cuida más, por eso quiere que no me vista de una determinada manera. Por lo tanto, el trabajo de autoestima y de entrega de recursos en el mundo adolescente es fundamental para la prevención. Eso.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is very good. And you're absolutely right. Encouraging people and helping them to see. There's a saying that sometimes you can be too close to the mirror to see. And teaching and educating about what domestic violence is. Often people don't know. Usually, you're the last person to know you're in a domestic violence situation, or that your relationship is abusive, because there's this cycle and there's all these different components of it. It's not just that isolated event that makes it domestic violence. And so, what you're saying, Andrea, yes, Andrea, is very important, and you're absolutely right. Is that that's something that we can do, is that we can teach and educate about what domestic violence is, what it looks like, and that some things that you might see as being romantic might be a red flag, or it might be a sign of a bad or abusive relationship. So thank you very much for that. Yes, you hit it on the head.
Y otra cosa pequeña que se me quedó en el tintero, tiene que ver con el plan. Al momento de hacer un plan, hay algunos stakeholders, ¿no? Personas que nos ayudan. El colegio, la profesora del niño, cuando voy a hacer el plan de salida, algún amigo significativo, en la iglesia si participo. Hay soportes que también hay que activar al momento del plan, porque más de la mitad de los casos retornan al agresor. Por lo tanto, el trabajo de contención de esa persona cuando despierta es multifocal.
Absolutely. Yes, I love that. You're absolutely right. So when we look at a safety plan, the safety plan is not just a sheet of paper. It's something that's in motion, and it's something that is in movement, and that we can involve all these different supports and all these different agencies to be a part of the safety plan, which makes it so much, which is so important. The more support that we have for a victim, the more likely they are to stay out of the relationship, and the safer they are. The more resources that we can offer for them, the more people that have hands on them, the better they are equipped to be able to start over from a domestic violence situation. So yes, thank you for that also. I love it. I can talk to y'all all day. Any other questions or comments? So I think no. Okay. So I just want to just to close out and to add, there was a poem that I wanted to read for you. And it's one of my very favorite poems. So if you guys will just entertain me for a minute. But it's really important because sometimes when we're dealing with domestic violence, we feel so helpless. The victim feels helpless and we as the helper feel helpless. But there are some things that we can do. We can educate, we can support, we can connect with resources. Those are things that are so very important. And we can also take care of ourselves to make sure that when we are there to support, that we are offering support with our full and our whole selves. And so that we are better equipped to handle and to manage these situations. It's easy for us to pass it off, but if you don't work with domestic violence and you don't know a whole lot about it, you want to pass it off to someone who is more um, well versed in it and someone who can help with those situations. And so don't feel bad about saying, I don't know a whole lot about this. Let me connect you to this resource who focuses on domestic violence and who can provide and who can give you the services that you need so that you can thrive. We want victims to not only survive from domestic violence, but we want them to thrive in domestic violence situations. We want them to be able to move forward. Again, research. Google is the most wonderful thing in the world. There's so many resources out there available. So much information is out there available. But I do want to tell you about everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody, because I think we have all been this body. I'm trying to hold this up and read it. So there was a most important job that needed to be done, and no reason not to do it. There was absolutely none. But in vital matters such as this thing, you have to ask, who exactly will it be who will carry out this task? Anybody could have told you that everybody knew that this was something somebody would surely have to do. Nobody was unwilling. Anybody had the ability, but nobody thought he was supposed to be the one. It seemed to be the job that anybody could have done if anybody thought he was supposed to be the one. But since everybody recognized that anybody could, everybody took for granted that somebody would. But nobody told anybody that we are aware of that he would be in charge of seeing it was taken care of. And nobody took it on himself to follow through and do what everybody thought that somebody would do. When everybody needs did not get done at all, everybody was complaining that somebody dropped the ball. Anybody then could see it was an awful crying shame, and everybody looked around for somebody to blame. Somebody should have done the job, and everybody would have, but in the end, nobody did what anybody could have. And what anybody can do is to provide support, to listen, and to be there. So I thank you all for sharing with me. There are a couple of resources there. Those national websites that are out there that talk about domestic violence. There's so much information available. Get on the way up. Look for resources. Look for resources in your community. Look for shelters in your community that can provide you with so much information with victims of domestic violence. Know it for others. Know it for yourself. Take care of others and take care of you.
Thank you so much, Nakimia. That was really insightful and so helpful to learn about. Has anybody got any final questions? I know we're well over our time, and I apologize again for the logistical issues at the beginning. But we will be here, and Nakimia will stay on for a minute or two in case anybody has any questions. And if anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to share contact information if you want to ask her any questions after the fact.
Yes.
So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I hope you have a good rest of your day and a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. It's very, very interesting.
Thank
Thank
you.